Okay, welcome everybody to this live webinar where we're going to learn how to work with a sliding animated pane in React. And so I'm going to show you the final version of what we're going to build out over the next 45 minutes to an hour. And so you can see right here, I brought in a project we formerly worked on, which was the dynamic list for drag and drop, and I've extended it. So now what we're going to build out is this cool little animated sliding pane. And this is a very helpful tool. It is built on top of the React Sliding Pane library, and I'll pull up this in the show notes. And then also I have the both a starter version and a final version of the project right here, and I'll include that in the show notes as well. And let me also, for everybody who's watching live, I will share it inside of the group chat. So what we're going to build is a integration where we have this sliding pane. And notice here, when I go down to each one of these links, when I click on it, it activates that pane. It slides out from the side, and then it also passes in some data. It passes in a thumbnail image and some metadata, a description, and those kinds of things. And so we're going to be able, in order to make this work, we're going to work with a number of different React types of features. We're going to be able to work with the use state hook for being able to toggle the visibility open and close. So we're going to keep track of that state for that sliding pane. We're also going to see how we can work with props, because what we have here is we need have this dynamic list. We don't want to have to create a different sliding pane for each one of those elements. And so instead, we're going to create one sliding pane component. And then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to, using props, we're going to pass data to that pane, and then it's going to dynamically render those values. So that is what we are going to build today. Let me open up the starter version. So in Visual Studio Code here, I'm going to stop the server, and I'm going to switch to the starter branch, and then we'll start up the server now. So I gave some base styles and some things like that. And so the main thing that we're going to be working on is going to be primarily focused on not really the styling. We're going to do some style customizations, but it's mainly going to be working on the React side. So now if I come back to the application and hit refresh, you can see if I try clicking on these, nothing is happening. So first and foremost, what we are going to do is we are going to see how we can keep track of some state. So we need to know, is the panel open? And if it is, what data is it going to have access to? So I am going to come into our D&D playlist here, and I'm going to add a new piece of state. We already have the array of songs. I'm going to create another one. And so this hook, this state hook, is going to be called, we'll just call it the details pane. And then we need the ability to set the details pane. And we want to do more than simply call and have the visibility shown. We also need to pass data to it. So instead of just using a Boolean value here, we're going to say that the details pane is going to have an object in it. And so it's going to keep track of if it's visible or not. And that's going to be a Boolean value. And this is only needed if you're writing this in TypeScript. If you're writing it in pure JavaScript, then you would have something that looks like this, where it'll say react.useState, and then you might put inside of here visible false. But we're doing this in TypeScript, so we need to describe the data that's going to go inside of that details pane. So it's going to say, we're going to say we have visibility is going to be either true or false. And then we're going to pass in some data that's going to be optional, and that's going to be of song type. And that song type is something that I described up here. It's simply an ID, title, and some of the metadata associated with that song. And then inside of here, for a base, we're going to say visible is going to be false. So let's just verify that this part of it is working. So I'm going to come down. I'm in the D&D playlist component here. And just inside of this list container, I'm going to say, is this true or is it false? So here I'll say should be open, and then we can put in here a value. So we'll call the details pane and then visible. And now what we need to do is we need to have the ability to toggle if that's open or not. And so, and also because this is a Boolean value, I'm going to say if it's visible, then I'm going to say should be open, or I can just say yes. And if not, I can just say no, just like that. So all I'm doing here, this is a ternary operator. I'm simply saying, is the details pane visible? If so, print out the text yes. If not, then no. So inside, if I go to our list, which is rendered right here, you can say we have an A tag. So we have the ability to click on it. And here I'm simply going to pass in the on click handler. I'm going to say, when this is clicked, I want you to set the details pane to visible true. And then we're also going to pass in some data. So data and then item. And item is what we have access to every time we're going through this list. We have access to this item, one of the items inside of that array, our playlist array. So when we click on this, we are going to set state and saying, yes, this is true. And then we're also going to pass in some data. So let's hit save. And let's just first verify that this is working. So now if I come here and it says should be open, no, which is good because that is our default state. And then if I click on one of these, oh, none of those are working. Let's see, what am I doing? Oh, it's because I put the on click handler in the wrong spot. This is the A tag for the handler. We need to add this to the title. So I'm going to make this. There we go. So now this is the thumbnail and we can have it on that. And then let's also do it on the title. So they can click on multiple items and all of those are going to activate that. So now you hit save. And so you have two different items that can open that up. So now if I click on this, now it says, yes, that's perfect. Now, if I click on it again, it's not going to do anything because it's not toggling. It's setting yes for each one of those. So if you want to see what data we have access to, we can come right here and where it says should be open. This is a handy little trick for debugging if you ever need to do that. You can create a div and then use the pre tag. And inside of here, use JSON stringify, and then I'll say details pane dot data and then null 2. And you'll see what this does here in a moment. So let's hit save. And so now it says should be open, no, which is good. I click on that and look, you can see all of that data. And if I click on one of the other ones, you can see that we have our ID and our thumbnail image and artist, all of those things, they are all changing as we're clicking around. So hopefully that's kind of a helpful visual for being able to see one, what's happening. We're able to update the state of that component, but then also you can see how we can dynamically slide in data. And technically, we have everything we need already to be able to pass this data somewhere else. So this could go in a sliding pane. It could go in a modal. You could have maybe you built out some type of form feature where you wanted the ability to click to edit one of these items and you needed to pass data into that form. Now you know how you can get access to that change the visibility of some component, and then also pass it some data. So that is all good. We can get rid of our debugging content here. And now that we have this, now we're ready to start building out that pane. Now, if you look at your package JSON file, you'll see that in both the starter and the final branch that I already installed React Sliding Pane. So you already have access to that. So now we can go and we can actually create this component. So I'm just going to call this the song pane. And then let's create the component itself. So we have our song pane component here, and it's going to take in a couple props. So I'm going to establish a type that we can just call props. And we'll say if it's open, we're going to say if it has data, and then we also need to provide the ability to close it. So we'll say visible and set that as a Boolean. We'll say data, and then that's going to be optional. And then we'll set that to the song type. And the reason why we have access to the song type is because I exported it right up here on line 6. So whenever you need, whether it's a function, a component, if you're working with TypeScript, a type, if you just say export right in front of it, then you can import it from other parts of the application. So we have visible as a Boolean, we have our data, and then lastly, we need to provide the ability to close the pane. So here we can just say close pane, and that is going to be a just anonymous function taking no arguments. So in TypeScript, when you need to describe a function, you can simply describe it like this. If we needed to actually pass in some data, so say we needed to close pane and we're going to pass it in a song or something, we could say we're passing in a song and that's going to be of song type, just like this. But in this case, we're not. When we want to close the pane, that's all we need to do. We don't need to pass in any data to that function. And then inside of song pane, here, we're going to grab all of that data. So we'll say visible data and then close pane. And we'll say that those are all being pulled in from the prop. So this is simply telling this function that you can take in these 3 values here. And now we can work with them. We can check to see if it's visible. We can get access to the data if it exists. And then we can even call this function of close pane. So now that we have that, now we can actually pull in the library itself. So there are a couple things, and they're in the documentation. Let me switch to the documentation page. So they have some really helpful examples and some things like that. So we can see how we want to import this. So we're going to import sliding pane, and then we're also going to import the style sheets. So this is going to be really helpful because the pane itself comes with some base styles. You can override them, which I'm going to show you how we can do that. But then it's really nice because they have some of the basic elements that you're probably going to want if you're building out this type of feature. So I'm going to bring those in, and I'm going to simply paste them in here right at the top. And now we can work with this. And so I'm going to first create a call to the component. So I'm going to say, I want to return this sliding pane, and we're going to pass in some props to sliding pane. And I'm going to turn off my GitHub Copilot because as helpful as it is, sometimes it kind of gets in the way of what I'm actually trying to describe. So we can give a class name. And for this, the basic one is sliding pane, but you can name this anything that you want. So you could say, my app custom class, something like that. But in this case, I'm just going to call it sliding pane. Just like that. And what that's going to do is, as you'll see here in a little bit, when we get to the point where we're customizing some of these styles, this gives us something, an actual CSS class we can reach into, we can grab it, and we can make any changes that we need to. So that is very helpful. So that's our class name. And then we need to say if it's open or not, because it's going to be listening for that value. So we're going to say is open, and we're going to set that equal to visible. So if as soon as we click on that item, we are now going to be able to keep track of that because we're going to pass it in as a prop. So that's is open. And then we're going to pass in a title. In this case, we're going to grab the data and we're going to say if it exists. So right here, we're using optional chaining. So that's what the question mark is. We're saying data dot title. Now, this is kind of a shorthand way of writing something like this. If you've ever had to write code like this, where you say data and data dot title, then print out data title, if not, do an empty string or something like that. I can simply consolidate this entire line, and I'll duplicate it here just so you can see the difference by simply saying data question mark title, just like that. It's just nice little kind of syntactic sugar for writing this type of JavaScript or TypeScript code. So that's a title. And we also need to provide a width. And for everyone on the call, make sure that you have your mic on mute, please. Okay, so we have a title, and now we're going to give a width. And in some previous videos, I've shown how we can create some hooks for keeping track of the width dynamically. And so you can definitely reference those for kind of the comprehensive way of doing it. Right here, I'm just going to use kind of a shortcut, and I'm just going to listen for, I'm going to check for whatever the window dot inner width is. That's just something built directly into JavaScript. And I'm going to say if the window inner width is less than, let's say 600, then I want this to be 100% width. And if not, I want it to be 500 pixels. And so what that is going to do is with these type of sliding panes, as you'll see here momentarily, you wouldn't want to have the sliding pane. You only take up a portion of the screen if someone's accessing the page on their smartphone. The typical use case is if someone opens up a sliding pane on mobile, it should take up the whole screen, just very similar to like how an app works. And so that's what we're going to do. We're saying if the inner width is less than 600, then let's have it take over the entire screen. If it is more than 600, then simply have it be at 500 pixels, or we can say 600 pixels, anything like that that you want, any type of value that you want. So that is going to be the width. And then we also have to give the sliding pane the ability to close the window. And the reason for that is because if you open up the pane, what a user usually expects is if they click outside of the pane, like the kind of that modal darker area, they expect that to close the pane. So we have to give it the ability to do that. And so they have a prop called on request close. And when that is called, we want to call close pane, just like that. And that's it for right now. So let's just put that in, and let's also do the same thing we did before, where we have our little pre-tag, and we'll say data and then, or JSON stringify, and then data and null 2. So this is going to just show us that we have access to the data. This data title call will also do the same thing. So I'm going to hit save, and now let's test this out. I'm going to go into our D&D playlist, and I'm going to import this, and I will import it right inside of this component. Now, the neat thing about this is the component itself is not going to show up until it's visible. It uses a very cool, much more advanced technique called a React portal to accomplish this. And we can look at that here in a minute. So what we can do is we can simply call and import our song pane. That imports it automatically at the top. I have the extension, the auto importer extension turned on. So we have our song pane, and we need to pass it a few props. So the first one is if it's visible or not. So here we'll say the detail, what do we call this? Details pane dot visible. And then the data is going to be equal to details pane dot data. And then we need to give the ability to close it. So that's going to be a function. And so there's a couple ways we could build this function. We can say for close pane, we can pass in an anonymous function just like this, where I can say the fat arrow and with before that some parens and then set details pane and then pass it in an object of visible false, just like this. And another way that we could do this is we could create something here. So I could create another function called close pane or whatever you want to call it. And then we could put all of this code or this call inside of that. And now inside of close pane, we don't have to use this anonymous function. We can just say close pane just like this. And with the way that JavaScript works, you can pass this in. And because it's a function itself, it's not going to be called until this function is actually invoked, until something calls it. So that is a handy way of doing it. Where this becomes, if you're wondering when you'd want to use one approach versus the other, what I usually do personally is if I have to call this process or anything inside of this function multiple times within the component, then I'll create a dedicated function just to make it easy to call whenever I need to. If not, it's perfectly fine to use that previous syntax. So let's test this out. Let's see if this is working. So you come right here and click on it and look at that. We have my title of my Sharona here, and then we have access to all of that data. So that is perfect. Let's click another one. So click there and you can see it changes. Also notice I can click out here and it closes the pane. I also can click up here and it'll do the same thing. And if you noticed in our final version, you'll see how we can actually customize the interface. And so we can create our own close button and do things like hide that header. But so far, so good. Everything here is working. So let's go and let's actually build this out. I'm going to open up the styles. And I already created the styles that we're going to need, so we can kind of follow this structure here. So I created something called song details. It's just a regular CSS class. It has spots for a thumbnail, for info, and some things like that. So we're going to be able to follow along with the way the CSS is written and create our component styles that way. So I'm going to get rid of this div tag. And now let's create one kind of main div content that's going to be called, let's see, class name is going to be equal to song-details. And now inside of here, we're going to bring in our thumbnail image and all of that content. So I'm going to close off this div. So we'll say song details, and I'm using right here, I'm using Sass, and that's a reason why if this type of syntax looks a little bit weird, this is pretty much the same thing as writing out a class that would look like this. Song details with these double underscores, thumb, and it's writing this is here on line 112. It's the exact same thing as using that ampersand type approach. It's just a shortcut way of being able to write it. And so now when I come here and say song details, I can say thumb, and then I can create a image tag right below that. And the image tag is going to have a source, and that source is going to be data. And I'm going to use a question mark here because data, as you know, doesn't always exist. As soon as we click out, data is going to be gone. So if we simply said data dot thumb, then we would run into an error. So we need to make sure data always exists. So I'll say data dot thumb. And then let's see, we also have our little info box. So with our info box, that's another div. So I'm going to say instead of thumb, I'll say info, close that one out. And now inside of info, this is where we're going to put some more of the content. Like this is where we'll put the artist name and some different things like that. So inside of info, I'll create another div, info dash dash, and we'll call this one box. And inside of here, we'll bring in the data dot artist, and then we're going to do the let's see, what's the other thing we have access to? It's the release date. Yes. So we'll do the release date. Make sure to close off that div. And then inside of here, let's follow along. Yeah, so we have our artist, and then we also have that release date. We'll just wrap those up in divs. Just like this. And then data.released. Hit save. And then lastly, we just have our content. So that's going to be the last thing down here. And that is going to be data.description, just like that. Okay, so let's see how it's working now. So let's just kind of see where we're at. Oh, and looks like, do we have an error or what do we have? Oh, yep, we have an error. Let's see what it is. Oh, and actually this is a great error to run into because I did exactly what I told you to watch out for. Right here, remember how I said you need to make sure that you have that little question marks because data doesn't always exist? That is exactly what would happen. Okay, there we go. Now we're back. Now, if you click on any of these links, you can see that is all working. So now you click on any of these, it's popping open the image, it's populating the name, the release date, and the content. So very nice job. If you've made it this far, that is looking really good. So that is all working beautifully. So now that we've done this, now what we can do is we can kind of dive into how to create some of those custom styles and those overrides, because there's probably a good chance that you may not actually need to build something out that looks exactly like this. Most of the time you need to build something out with some customizations in it. So let's see how we can do that. There are two different approaches or two different kind of paths that we're going to take. One is going to be related simply to the component itself. It has some built-in shortcuts for doing things like hiding the header. Then the other ones are going to be more related to writing our own custom CSS classes and creating overrides. And so we're going to be able to do both so that when you need to implement this on your own, then you're going to be able to do that. So the first thing we'll do is we'll see how we can use a prop. So the sliding pane, if you go through the documentation, save here. And so if you go through documentation, you'll see they actually have something called hide header. And it just takes a Boolean value. So anytime that you, in React, anytime that you want to pass in a prop and you just always want it to be true, you can write it out just like this. This is the exact same thing as writing hide header equals curly brackets true. So anytime you have some value, it's always going to be true. You can just write it exactly like this. So if I hit save, now if I click here, you'll see the header is gone. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we're wanting. But now what we need to do is we need to add our own close button, because even though you can click out of it, there are a lot of people who will see this pop up and have no idea how to close it. So just to kind of follow some good best practices when it comes to user experience and things like that, we will add that in. And in fact, I already wrote the CSS for how this is supposed to work. So right below where it says info here, we're going to create a tag. So I'm going to create an a tag, and then inside of here, I'm going to call, let's see, I believe it's BS caret left. Yes. So this is just bringing in a little icon from React icons. And then we can just say close. And then let's give this the class name of song details dash dash info or underscore info, and then dash dash close, just like we have written right over here. And then this link by itself right now does nothing. So this is what's neat about being able to pass in functions to child elements. We can actually pass in and work with that same close pane function. So here we'll say whenever this is clicked, so I can say on click, simply call close pane, just like this. So now if we come back and open this up, you'll see we have our little close icon, and that all works. So that is working beautifully. So now I think the last thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of all of this extra space. So the way that you can do this is you can look at the CSS, and let me zoom in here, just make it a little easier to see. So you see where it says slide, all of this is provided in the library. So right here, we have this slide pane overlay, this slide pane class. And then inside of here, we have slide pane double underscore content. And so this is what has that padding. And so what we can do, and if say that we were doing this and I'd never worked with a sliding pane before, the very first thing I would do is I would come here and I would look at these values and I would change them in the browser to see what happens. So here I can come and I can get rid of the padding value and I can add my own. I'll say padding 0 pixels, and you'll see that that gives us exactly what we want. So to override this, we can simply copy this class name just like this, and then down below, we can provide our custom styles. So here we'll just say padding at 0 pixels, just like this. Hit save, and now if you come back, hit refresh, you'll see that we have the styles. We have overridden the default ones that the library itself provides, and now we have our own custom styles right here. Another neat thing here, if you open this up and you open it up like you're in a phone, so if you're in the browser tools and you click the little toggle device toolbar, you'll see, and let me hit refresh here. You click on this, you'll see that now this is working beautifully, just like it was an app or something like that. So if you're you're building an application or a web application on a phone and you want to use a sliding pane, you can provide that 100% value on phones, and you can see now it takes up that entire value. You can also do the same thing on a regular desktop. So say in a desktop environment, you don't want just the pane to cover up 500 pixels. You want it to cover up the whole screen. You can do the same thing. And because we have a little bit more time, we can actually I can show you how to customize that right here. So we'll build out a additional feature called maximize. So let's come into the song pane, and we're done with our styles. So get rid of that. And here, let's keep track of the value of maximize. So I'm going to say const, and then we can say max and set max. And by default, we'll say React use state, and we'll say by default, we want this to be false. So this is just another use state hook here. And what we can do is add in some additional logic for the width of that pane. So I'm going to create another variable here, and we'll just call it pane width. And so we'll say if max is true, then we want it to be at 100%. And if not, then we want to have some additional logic here. And so what we can do is, this might look a little bit tricky, but we'll walk through it just so you can make sure it's all clear. I'm going to say if it's at max, or with two pipes, if the window width is less than 600, in other words, if it's on a phone, then I want it to be at 100% width. And if not, then I want it to be at 500 pixels. So it's just a ternary operator. And now we'll keep track of this, and we'll say pane width is going to be that value. So now that we have that, what we can do is we can create another link here. We can use the same styles. And we can say full screen, or let's just say toggle size. Toggle size. And then instead of BS caret left, let's see, I think there's something called like maximize. Yeah, something like that. That's in just React icons library. So we'll say we want the ability to toggle that size. And then for, instead of close pane, what we can do is pass in a function where we say set max, and then we're going to toggle it. So the way you can do that is you can say, just set it to whatever the opposite of the current max value is. This, what I'm writing right here, this is exactly the same as saying something like set max to max, or we can even create, just to make it super clear on what I'm doing. So say on max press, we'll say if max is true, then set max to false. And if not, then set max to true. All of this code that I just wrote right here, this is all combined by simply saying set max and then putting an exclamation mark right there. This code on line 41 is exactly the same as the 6 or 7 lines of code that is on lines 18 through 24. So it's just a nice kind of shorthand way for writing that code and toggling it. So let's hit save and let's see if this is working. So if I open this up, now you see we have toggle size, and it looks like our little icon isn't there, but that's fine. So I click toggle size, and look at that. Click toggle size, and now we're controlling the local state with inside of that component. So now we have the ability to manage that. And it's a pretty common thing when I build these panes out. I usually have some function for setting the max value width versus just kind of the default width, because like say that you're building out a blogging platform or something like that. Sometimes they may want to see just the kind of the basic small pane, but other times they may want to take over the whole screen just to make it easier to see everything. And so this little toggler gives you the ability to do that. So that is it. Within less than an hour, you will have built out a full animated sliding pane in React. So does anybody have any questions or anything like that? And if you do, please type them into the chat, and then I will answer them as best as I can. While you're doing that, I will also paste in a link to the documentation page. They have some great examples as well. So if you click on their try example page, you'll see some of the other props and options. So right here, you see you can open up, you're not limited simply to the right-hand side. You can also open it up to the left, and you can open it up to the bottom just like this. So you have a lot of, this is the default one, but you have a lot of different kind of variations with what you can do there, which makes life much easier whenever you're having to build this kind of thing out. I can tell you from experience, because I have built these kinds of things out from scratch before, and working with these types of animated panes and managing their state and working with all of the different CSS values that are, associated with doing this, it can definitely be pretty tricky. So this is a great library. I use it on a number of projects. And so Lexia asked a great question. Can we follow the same process to build a hamburger menu? Absolutely. Yes, you definitely can. And in fact, I can kind of show you right here exactly how you could do it. So you could come, like say that we wanted to do that in our main application. Let's see where it's at. Yeah, so we have our playlist here. And let's just pretend that instead of this toggling between the views, let's pretend that this is a hamburger menu and we wanted to do that, like some type of navigation bar or something. You can literally use pretty much the exact same code. So I can just very quickly say this is our nav bar pane, paste this in. But instead of all of these kind of values, so instead of like the song type and those kinds of things, we'll get rid of data here, and we won't use max, we'll just use the pane width at, for mobile, just like that. Title, we can use a hard-coded string of navigation, something like that. And then inside of it, we can say, let's see, we can still use song details. And then here, we can just use some, say these are nav links. So here we'll say, home, and next one would be like about, and then contact us, just like this. And now inside of our playlist component, we can use the same thing, except we can make this one even, for this state, we can make this even shorter. We can just say show nav and then set show nav and call React use state. It'll be false by default. And now if we come down to our little buttons, so we have this, I'm going to hide one of them just so it's not confusing to see these. And then let's actually hide both and make this just a regular link. So we'll just make it an A tag that has this grid in here. And then I'll say on click, we want to set show nav to true. So just like this, and then we also inside of here have to call our nav bar pane. See, did I not change the name? I probably didn't. Nope. Nav bar pane, just like this. And now I can import it. Nav bar pane, set it to visible is going to be if show nav bar. Let's see, show nav, that's the right state name, and then close pane. In this case, I'm just going to pass in the anonymous function of set show nav to false. Hit save, and let's see if this works. So now if I come here, there you go. So there is your hamburger menu, and less than like 5 minutes. So yeah, it's this is definitely one that I've used before on other projects, and it makes life much easier for doing this as compared to trying to like write all of this yourself. You can also change these styles however you need. So like let's look at the slide pane content. Um, let's see, do I have access to change like the background color? We can try. So like, can I do something like background color RGBA 111 0.5, yeah, something like that. So you can change the styles however you want, and it gives you a lot of control to the point where you can customize these to the point where people may not even realize you're using the sliding pane library just because of everything that you're building out and how custom you can make them, from images to videos. You can almost think of it like it is its own page. So that's a very good question. Does anyone else have any questions related to this or anything else? Okay, if not, I want to thank everybody for your time. I greatly appreciate it. As always, I hope that all of the work you're doing is fulfilling and you're really enjoying it. And I will see you next month when we find another cool